and it hits me, oh my gosh, this is that triangle.
You know, there's explanation for everything that occurred in the Rendlesham-Pars incident that doesn't involve aliens at all.
It was completely silent. It comes right over our heads.
He saw a classic flying saucer really standing in the clearing.
He turned over to my father and held his hand, and he looked in his eyes and he said, "We're not alone."
Welcome to Podcast UFO for our live show. We're live every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on the Dark Matter Radio Network. Please remember to visit the website podcastufo.com for past episodes, blogs, and forums. During the show, feel free to participate live in our chat room. And don't forget to like us on our very active Facebook page.
Hello and welcome to the show. I am Martin Willis, your host. And coming up in just a minute, we have the one and only Alejandro Rojas with UFO Updates. Our guest today, this evening, but it's not evening where he is Ben Hurle. He's from Victoria, Melbourne, Australia. And interesting guest. I had him on a number of years ago. He's coming back to tell us what's new in his region of Australia. If you support the show, I want to thank you very much. If you'd like to support us for only $2 or more a month, just go to podcastufo.com. The information's right there. If you can't help us out, you still want to listen to the full shows, you can always watch us live on YouTube, and that is every Wednesday night at 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on our website or through YouTube. You can also listen on the Dark Matter Digital Network every Thursday from 10 to midnight, and that's Eastern Standard Time. Alejandro, how are you?
I'm good. Sorry, I was just swallowing some water.
I always have perfect timing. Hey, you're going away next week. You're not going to be on the news next week.
I'm sailing away.
Yes,
I don't know the other words. Like la da da do 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 do.
This is Christopher Cross, right? Isn't that who that is?
I think so.
Yeah. Well,
I'll be sailing all next week. I'm going to attempt to make it an alien and UFO free week. So it'll be beach and sun.
You may not have any control over that, though, you know.
I never do, unfortunately. But, I mean, if UFOs or aliens appear, that would be great. That'd be wonderful. I'll try to document it, but you probably won't hear about it until I get back because I'm not going to write the story or anything.
Yeah.
I'll document it and then write the story when I get back. And so because I'm chilling.
Yeah, awesome. That's great. Well, and did I hear you say you're going to the Sea of Cortez or something like that?
I'm going to a few places. Yeah, well, I'll be going to Cabo. So I'm going to leave from L.A., and it'll fly down to Baja. And, I'm not familiar with all of the seas that I will be visiting. But
wow,
I know I will be on the sea. It'll be the Gulf of California.
Uh-huh. Yeah, well, great. Hope you have a wonderful time. So what's happening with the UFO news this week?
UFO news, lots of UFO news. There's some headlines that are kind of cool. So I just want to go over these very quickly. And you can find these if you go to openminds.tv and under the articles and look at daily UFO headlines, because we post them every day. You can see that today's headlines right on the front page. But if you want to see the past ones, you just go to articles and go to daily UFO headlines. And I just want to mention, because there's a couple cool things. Vice has written a story about Hynek, J. Allen Hynek, who was a consultant to the Air Force when they investigated UFOs, who became a UFO believer, essentially, and started, I like to say, he's like the father of modern ufology. He started UFO research afterwards. So that's really cool. That's something to check out. There are some other UFO sightings. But I guess one thing we could talk a little more detail on out of all of these is an article from the Mirror Online talking about Peter Robbins. So you've had Peter Robbins on the show, right?
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Great guy. So I've had him on before as well. Known him for years. And to know him is to love him, I feel like.
You know, he's a great guy. Yeah.
But one thing that's probably been difficult for you and has been difficult for me is that early on, having met and researched Larry Warren and his claims, he was the first witness to come forward with Rendlesham. He just says a lot of stuff that is just, I felt from the beginning, blatantly not true. And then more and more has come to light about lies, and even in his professional career, some fraud that he's in trouble for, and that has taken place. Some of which has been regarding some Photoshop stuff, like even a picture that you feel might, you glance in Peter's book might be benign, but it turns out it's attached to this fraud that's been being committed. So Peter has finally come out and said, I don't trust him anymore, and I don't believe everything he's said, interestingly enough. Now, people contend but he was the first one to come out. However, the evidence shows, and a lot of people have argued this. I mean, Linda Howe even said this at our conference 3 years ago, that she believes, and I think she's right, that Larry Warren was there. I mean, he was, but he wasn't part of any of the UFO event. His roommate had told him about it. And in this letter where he says, look, this is proof I was there from it, that he wrote his mom, he says he even refers to something that happened to these other people, not him. So, it's kind of, I feel good that Peter has come out. I think that, I don't know if he's been in denial, but, he's very loyal to his friends. And I think he's very loyal to Larry. And you never want to believe anything that a friend of yours has been deceiving you over something that's so important to you. That's an interesting story. So you can read that on the link there. But another piece of news that I think is good, and I just wrote about this. So I've got a long story, is on 60 Minutes. Robert Bigelow, he's was a real estate mogul. He owns like the budget suites all around the country. So he's this billionaire. Well, some of you probably know, I don't know how much you've covered this on your show, but I've covered it a lot on my show, how Bigelow's been into UFOs for a long time. And in 1995, started an organization, the National Institute for Discovery Science, to research UFOs and other paranormal phenomena. Once that went away, his other interest has been space. He started an organization, Bigelow Aerospace. And it's an interesting story, and I write about it. I write more about the history of Robert Bigelow regarding UFOs and space in my story, because essentially he was into space. He wanted to do something all by himself. He was going to these meetings where NASA was trying to essentially get people to buy into this project that was dying. And he didn't even have a company or anything, and he goes to these meetings. No one wanted to buy the project, so he did, which was essentially these inflatable units that can act as their own space station. They can attach to a space station. They could be used as a moon base, which is something that he's trying to do. And all by himself, he started this up, and now he's a big deal in the industry. So he was on 60 Minutes talking about all of this. He's got an inflatable unit on the International Space Station right now.
Right.
What's cool about Bigelow is that he is into UFOs, and he never shies away about talking about UFOs. So they asked him about UFOs, and he said, sure, I believe in UFOs. I believe that aliens are visiting us, and to me, that's the real deal. So really cool, really bold. It's funny, too, because Laura Logan, the one who interviewed him, she asked, is it risky for you to say in public that you believe in UFOs and aliens? He says, I don't give a damn. I don't care. She said, you don't worry that some people will say, did you hear that guy? He sounds like he's crazy. He said, I don't care. It's not going to make a difference. It's not going to change reality of what I know.
That's right, yeah. I tried to find this as a video, the interview, and you can't find it anywhere. I thought perhaps 60 Minutes would post it somewhere, but they really haven't. But there are transcripts of the entire interview online. You can find them, even on the 60 Minutes site. And I read through that yesterday. Yeah, I love it. I love it.
So I've got a link to that in my story. I've got a link. I put out a transcript of just the UFO portion in my story. And then I go over some of the controversy that's gone on with Bigelow in the UFO community, how they've just been really, a lot of people have been vile and mean. And maybe some of you are going, but I've heard those rumors, Bigelow's a bad dude. Well, read my article, because I go over this. And I do have special insight into some of this because I was on the MUFON. I was the director with MUFON. I was their spokesperson when we went through this procedure of trying to partner with Bigelow Aerospace. And so I give my insight into how that all went down.
Well, can we talk about this just a little bit?
Sure.
The part where I've had people contact me and give their 2 cents, they said something along the line that Bigelow was paying for the reports from MUFON, and then he was like hiding them away or something like that. Can you just kind of put a stop to that rumor?
Yeah, it's so frustrating because it's total BS. Now, I will say this. There was here's where I had a disagreement with the board with MUFON over this whole thing, and it wasn't like a big deal. It was just we were signing non-disclosures. They asked us to sign non-disclosures for people who were involved with the project. It's no big deal. In corporations, non-disclosures is the common thing for practically everything, right. Every partnership. And also, I use anonymous sources at that time. I have to. This FLIR expert that I go to for FLIR videos, he doesn't want to share his name because he's a professional. He doesn't want his reputation to get damaged. So that happened. So really, when you get into scientists getting involved with this, we've talked to scientists or other people on, that, like, for instance, the UFO data, some of their participants are anonymous because they can't reveal their names. They're scientists. Mm-hmm. So that's what that was about. My argument was this, that if we're going to sign this document, we should tell everybody that we're signing this. And they said, no, let's not do that. We don't want to make a big deal out of it. And I was afraid it's going to get out anyway. So I said, you know what, I'm just not going to sign it. How's that? And what I meant by that is because I was a spokesperson, I didn't want to be responsible for being accused of being a possible potential leaker if something happened, or also just so I wouldn't accidentally say something I shouldn't. I felt it was best I didn't sign it. But there's practically nothing. I got to know all the ins and outs of the projects, and I was there the whole time. That's not what happened. What this was about was they were funding a special group that could get out and investigate UFOs very quickly, a MUFON group. And also they bought some great equipment for this group to use. And if any scientific analysis had to be done, which is expensive, they said they would do it. They also then had a budget, like a monthly budget, going to MUFON to run this program to be able to do this. It did include MUFON forwarding cases to Bigelow Aerospace. That's true. But they post those cases online also. So it was nothing that the public didn't have themselves. And I asked these questions. We all asked these questions. There was nothing Bigelow was provided that the public was not provided. In fact, people said, they were squirreling away cases. That's not true at all. We wrote on openminds.tv about the best cases. I have some links in our story and on Open Minds magazine. So I had access to the best stories. And, once the research was done, like any of the cases, even today, we would post stories about these great cases. So, there was nothing they had, but everyone else had. Also, MUFON was fully in charge of these investigations. One of the other controversies is that, Bigelow was showing up at investigations before. And there has been some shadiness on, to be honest, some of the volunteers of MUFON's part around this. Essentially what happened in one instance, MUFON couldn't get people there quick enough. And, time was going, a week, 2 weeks. It was going by. And MUFON couldn't get any investigators there because their investigators are all volunteers. They got to get time off of work. And right. I think this was a place where you had to drive to. And Bigelow wanted to get there. So MUFON told him, it's okay, go ahead and you can get there first, which was against the protocol that was set up. But they got permission. So they went there, they talked to the witnesses, and that was it. And this started this whole rumor that Bigelow was going and like the Men in Black getting in there and talking to witnesses before MUFON, and that was not the case. They never did anything like that without permission. And, there's been people on the MUFON side who have been wobbly about this, and unfortunately, and fostering these conspiracy type of things. But it's all BS. I mean, I was there the whole time. So all of this conspiracy stuff, and then some other disagreements between money and ego and stuff like this got in the way, and it eventually all fell apart. But it was a great plan if it had all worked out, but unfortunately it didn't.
Right.
But I personally, I know John Alexander, George Knapp, a lot of the people he's worked closely with, Colm Kelleher, and these are all great people and who have just done amazing things for this field, and so has Bigelow. And even when you hear the interviews with him, I mean, I think he's coming from a good place on all of this. And he's a good champion for this topic. And I even go over when Jesse Ventura's people called me and asked me about some of the goofball conspiracy junk they had come up with, stuff that was so silly I had never even heard about. Yeah.
So MUFON has been kind of, I want to say, has been the topic of a lot of ufologists lately. What do you think about that whole situation, Alejandro?
Well, I guess what I'll say, because I've said stuff on social media, even in the Open Mind UFO News group on Facebook. I've posted a little bit and I made some comments. I guess I've shared with you that I'm no fan of the topic of this conference coming up, the next symposium, secret space programs. I don't feel there's any credible information, and I actually feel some of the people they're having are charlatans, to be completely honest. And so I don't feel good about that. I don't think there's evidence. I don't think it has anything to do with UFOs. So I'm not cool with that. I also, a lot of this has to do with John Ventry, the Pennsylvania state director, who had some racist comments to make. He's made some very poorly worded comments, and he's attacked good researchers in the past, and I've even had to scold him online on social media and in our group. So he's done that in the past, but this racist stuff, it just should not be tolerated at all.
I agree.
And I think that it's unfortunate because when MUFON did come up with their stance, it was like, well, we can't control what people do on social media. Sure you can. Your leaders, there can be repercussions for that. That's a ridiculous response. Any corporation would let that person go and apologize for the incident taking place, which is what should have happened. And when key members began to say they're leaving over this whole thing, MUFON did let, and he is no longer a state director and has been let go. And so it was unfortunate they didn't make a quick enough response on that. I would say, with today's leadership, Jan Harzan, the guy who runs MUFON right now, is a great guy. All of the MUFON board have their hearts are in the right place. They want to look for the truth. They want to investigate UFOs. They're all wonderful people, and their hearts in the right place. I don't agree with a lot of what they think their direction should be, certainly, but I still have the utmost of professional respect for all of those guys, even if I disagree with their response to John Ventry. They should have acted quicker and more firmly. But so I don't know. Here again, remember, MUFON's made up of thousands of people.
Right.
Everyone who's most part well-intentioned people who just want to learn more and know more. And so, that's what it comes down to. It's a volunteer organization. So does that answer your question?
Yes, Alejandro. I want to thank you for a lot of things, of course, but for actually tackling that very touchy subject. Thank you very much for talking about it. And I never say this enough. Thank you so much for helping us out with the news. I just love you, and I love having you on this show, and it means a lot to me. So,
well, I do feel like you say it enough, and it's my pleasure. I love doing it.
Great, awesome. All right, well, you have yourself a great a great time out there on the seas, and be careful. Talk to you in a couple of weeks.
All right. Talk to you then.
All right. All right, hang in, everyone. We'll be right back with Ben Hurle. Hey, Ben, welcome to the show.
G'day, Martin. How are you? Thank you for having me on the show, and good evening to all your listeners as well.
Yes. I think you were on, I can't remember, was it 3 years ago or something like that? Time is just going so fast, I can't remember. But
yeah, at least a couple of years ago, and at the time I think we had a rather lengthy discussion about the Burks Flat bending headlights case.
Oh, I love that one. Yeah, we'll have to touch on that at some point. But anyway, for the person who is not familiar with you, and also I got to ask you, can you on your Skype screen? I hate to ask this live, but can you close your chat? I can't remember exactly what you do, but I think you click twice on your screen.
Yep. All done.
Because it's cutting you right out.
Okay. Yep, that's
now
all done.
I'm still seeing it here. Okay. That's all right. I can make an adjustment on this end. Let me make an adjustment. So let's tell the listening audience a little bit about yourself and how you got interested in the topic. Do you actually see you don't see the text messages right beside you on your screen? You do not?
It's all
That
gone.
is strange. Okay.
No, it's all.
Let me see if I can figure out.
Yeah.
It might be on my end. Hang on.
You're right.
I got
Well,
it. I got
make
it.
a start if
Okay,
you
we're all
like.
set. Sorry about that. This is my fault. How about that? So, yes, if you would tell them about yourself and how you got interested in the topic. And then, of course, we're going to talk about the organization and some great sightings. And I do want to say this. I think I've mentioned this to you before last time you were on. I think, what does Australia have, like 26 million people or something like that?
That's right. We're a lot less smaller than the United States or Europe. But it's a large landmass. It's as big as the United States, but it's very sparsely populated, and that makes it we're very much centric around the capital cities and some larger regional towns in this country. So there's lots of wide open spaces out there where there's hardly any people at all, and that's really made for some wonderful UFO cases that have occurred here over the years.
Yes, and I know a lot of people go coastal, along the coast there. But what I wanted to say was that you are the third largest listenership to my shows, your country. And, yeah,
That's
it's amazing. It's U.S. first, UK. Sometimes UK's been beat out, but Australia's always been in third. So a lot of listeners, a lot of sightings, evidently, right?
There is, absolutely. Yeah, Australians I think in the 21st century we're seeing that, people these days tend to have, I think they're a lot more open to this type of phenomena. I think, and people are not so afraid to come out and talk about their experiences now as they were 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. So, and I think that people are also prepared to a certain extent, challenge the establishment and things like that. So in the past, you would, people, if the police said this or the government said this, people would pretty much, toe the line. But now there's a lot more freedom out there. And with the explosion of social media over the last few years, we've definitely seen a lot more freedom in people's ability to express. Now, some of that's good and some of that's bad as well. And I think that sometimes some of the critical aspects of UFO investigation tend to disappear. For our country here, the sightings are occurring on a very regular basis. Now, good sightings or high quality flaps, now they're a little bit rarer, unfortunately. And I think, in the last few years, we've probably been in a little bit of a downward cycle for what I, as a UFO researcher, would call something that had real grit to it. Our reporting line gets a lot of reports coming through, and a lot of it still is your classic lights in the sky sort of stuff.
Do you think, in your case, I just want to take some examples here, and like Roswell, Rendlesham Forest, all Phoenix Lights. A lot of these are older cases, but people are still investigating them quite intensely. I just had Don Ledger last week from the Shag Harbor incident. So it's almost like either new things are found out as more witnesses come forward after, say, something's publicized on TV or something like that, and someone says, "Oh yeah, I saw that," or I don't know if you heard about Kurt Russell recently about the Phoenix Lights. But so do you have any cases like that where, I know there's Westall, where people keep researching them even though they're historical cases?
Absolutely. There's Australia and Victoria, the state where I am, and we'll do a little bit of a brief bio for everybody in a minute. Victoria, the state where I am, is down in the southeastern part of Australia. It's what's the smallest mainland state, but it's had quite a few of Australia's greatest UFO incidences have occurred in our state. And yes, many of those have been investigated over the years, and the Westall one's a classic example of that. That was on the 6th of April 1966, so quite a few years ago now. And that case is continually being investigated, even to this day. In fact, it's probably been investigated more strongly now than it ever has been at any previous point in time. Another classic is the Fred Valentich disappearance in his Cessna over Bass Strait in 1978. Oh, yes. Researchers are still working on that case. So these are old chestnuts, but there's still work to be done in those cases, and it's important that we do that. Myself personally, I've taken a slightly different route in my approach to investigation. I am involved in some of those larger cases as well, but I've tended to focus on what I call the forgotten files. The cases that have drifted into urban legend, the cases that have almost fallen off the radar. They've appeared in yellowed old newspaper reports from 20, 30 years ago, but effectively for the public now, those cases have been forgotten. So that's where I like to spend my time, looking at perhaps cases that aren't quite so prominent as a Westall / Phoenix Lights situation. And I also look for cases where the object is a little bit different, not just a classic silvery disc type of a thing. And I look for light cases too, where the light behaves rather unusually. So my ears really prick up when I go through old files and dig through old records, and I find these little cases and they happen to everyday Australians. They're happening to policemen, to farmers, to that type of thing, everyday Australians, and that's really the lifeblood of the community. And these are the people having these encounters. So I like to spend, a fair amount of time digging through, and I'm hoping to put together a bit of a book of the cases that are there that are really strong, that have credible witnesses, but people in our own country won't know about these cases, let alone anybody in the United States.
Right.
Or the rest of the world.
Yes.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
I'll just that brief block for you that you asked me, if you like. So for those of you who aren't familiar with me, obviously I'm Ben Hurle. Got involved in UFOs from a very early age. I think I was looking at the sky from the minute I could point my head up. And the first books I ever ordered in school book clubs were UFO-related books. And I've had a strong and healthy interest in the unknown my entire life, particularly UFOs. had a couple of my own sightings that occurred to me as well, which were kind of, personal confirmation that, yes, this is a genuine and real phenomenon that we are dealing with through nothing like personal experience. And when I got into my early 40s, I thought to myself, well, I really want to get involved in investigation. I want to find out what is going on. I want to be active. I don't want to be an armchair, keen person. I want to get out there and I want to actually be involved in this phenomenon. So I don't live in Melbourne. I live 3 hours east of Melbourne. So one day I drove down to Melbourne and I attended a meeting, the first UFO meeting I ever went to, which was George Simpson, a UFON, who was running meetings. So I went down there and attended the meeting and started to get involved. And then at that very meeting, I met another man called Andrew Arnold, who had founded Victorian UFO Action, which is the group that I'm now the director of. And to say the rest is history, effectively. So, from that point, Andrew and I got together and we started thinking to ourselves, we really need to get UFO research going in Victoria again, because we did have the Victorian Flying Saucer Research Society, VUFOS, which was here since the 50s and it petered out in the mid-2000s. So there was this gap of about 5 years where nothing was happening at all, basically. So we decided we wanted to form a group again, and we wanted our group to be not a MUFON as such. MUFON's a large organisation with a lot of a lot of things that go along with a large organisation. So our organisation's a lot smaller, and our team currently is around about 15 people. That's it. So it's a nice sized group of people who are dedicated, and we've spent our the last 5 years or so, providing a reporting centre for people. So people, if they have an encounter, they can report it to us. That's the first thing which had fallen by the wayside. No one was doing that. We've done our documentaries, which are on our UFOA YouTube channel. So if you want to YouTube VUFOA TV, don't mind my Australian accent, UFOA TV, you can see all our documentaries that we have made. Those documentaries have been about Victorian cases, talking to Victorian witnesses, researchers, the stuff that you can't see, the non-history channel, National Geographic sort of stuff. It's very much more of a grassroots approach to it. We've got our little HD camera. We go out all over the countryside talking to people and getting into the heartland of Victoria's UFO experience. So that's what we've been doing essentially. And on top of that, I've done some radio work as well. I've been on your show, other shows. I've had my own radio show, and I've also done a bit of work for National Geographic recently on a series that they had called Invasion Earth. And I did the segment on the Burks Flat bending headlights case. So I've been involved actively for a good solid 5 years, but I've always had a lifelong interest. So for those of you who don't know me, that gives you a bit of a brief rundown on who I am.
Thank you very much. So could you turn your speakers down just a little bit? I hear a little bit of feedback come back out of that. So just turn so you can still hear me, but just not so loud. Okay, let's talk about the what'd you call it? The bending headlight case. That's the car. That's crazy.
Yeah,
I got to hear that one again.
I'll just give you a little. I've got so much good stuff for you, Martin. It's great, and we'll do a bit of a recap on the bending headlights case. So that occurred in April 1966, and that was a very important flat that occurred here in Victoria at that time. In fact, probably almost the best one that we've had. It started on the 2nd of April, then the 4th of April, and then the 6th of April. So over that period of time, there was 3 significant UFO events that occurred. The first one on the 2nd of April was the Baldwin photo, where a man took a photograph at close range of a silver disc, and we discussed this last time. And that ended up on the front page of the Herald Sun, which was the newspaper in Melbourne. That started it off. 2 days later, on the 4th of April 1966, a man was driving in the country for work at night, and in an area called Burks Flat, which is just a flat, plain area. There's nothing out there. He noticed a strange light in the paddock off to his right. And as he approached it, he thought it was a tractor engaged in night ploughing. And as he got closer to it, he started to feel a tugging on his chest, and his headlights started to waver. And as he slowed right down, and as he got close close to the object, his headlights bent off the road, and they were attracted to this object. And what was the object? He described it as an inverted ice cream cone type of a appearance. It had a white disc on top and a smaller white disc at the bottom, and there was all these tubes of light coloured light passing between the bottom of the ice cream cone to the top of the ice cream cone. And then as he approached it, he realised he was about to drive off the road because he was following his headlights. He put in a counter steer, and he narrowly avoided hitting a tree on the other side of the road. As he did that, the entire object closed up and then it disappeared. And he was very shaken, drove off to his destination, and that was it. Just a horrible experience for a man out there on the lonely country road. On the 6th of April 1966, 2 days later again, that was when the Westall school encounter occurred. So within a week, you've got those three key events. Then a couple of days later, a young man was killed at Burks Flat at exactly the same spot when his car veered off the road and hit a tree right where Ron Sullivan had his UFO encounter. That brought Ron out because Ron thought, oh, gee, Burks Flat, a young guy died there. I better say something. So he did. And in 1966, he was perhaps, maybe opening himself to ridicule at that time. And he came forward and said, look, I had a really weird encounter out there at Burks Flat, a couple of days ago, and now this young man's been killed. That created a whole possibility that this young man had also had a similar experience out there. So that was the case that I got involved in a couple of years ago, and we took Ron Sullivan, the witness, back to Burks Flat for the first time. He hadn't been there since the incident, and we filmed around that case, and we found a lot of other people. We did archive research. We found the autopsy report for the young man who was killed. So we went to a lot of effort to do that. And that's that period of time that I'm talking about. These UFO events, they tend to occur around these, it almost seems to be 10, 20-year type of cycles to get anything really, really good, something that you can really sink your teeth into. So that, to me, that case, and why did I like the Burks Flat so much? Well, the object was a really unusual object. And Ron described the object as not emitting any shadows at all. So the light was fully contained. So when he looked at it, it wasn't casting looming shadows across the trees. It just the whole light complex was contained. And he went back there the next day, day after. And when they went there, they found a depression in the paddock where it looked like a vacuum cleaner had been put on reverse and blasted this area of dirt out in the field, I should say. Paddock's a very Australian term for a field. So. And then they noticed some dead parrots were lying around in the area as well. So it was a very strange experience. And that tale, the Westall tale, the Baldwin photo, all of that had been forgotten. All of that had just, made the news of the day, and people scratched their beards for a while, and then they all moved on with life. So, and those cases laid quite still for a while. Bill Chalker, a great Australian researcher, did a visit to Burks Flat in 1980. And did a bit of work on the case at that point in time. Westall had disappeared into urban legend basically at that, for a long time. And then over the time, these cases started to gain traction again. And so these large cases started to get researchers interested in them. We started doing the work that perhaps should have been done at the time or couldn't have been done at the time, or, we start looking at it with 21st century eyes. And I think that's helped these cases bring them back to life for people, so that people can now look at these cases and go, wow, something actually really did happen back then. These were credible people. These students were credible. The teachers saw that UFO at Westall. Ron Sullivan was a businessman. He had no reason to make any of that up, and there was supporting evidence there. Mm-hmm. So very, very, very good stuff, and it's all part of our state's rich tapestry of UFO reports. And people ask me all the time, well, you're a UFO researcher, where do UFOs appear? And I say, UFOs appear everywhere. And I go, now don't think I'm nutty when I say that to you, because if you actually go back and study the record, every region of our state, every area has a UFO history. Doesn't mean it's happening all at once in every location, but at some point in time, whether it's been Melbourne, whether it's been the northeast, the southwest, East Gippsland, where I live, the northeast, the mountain ranges, the high country as we call it, all those areas have got really good UFO stories. and they disappear. They get lost. People don't report them. They tell a few friends, they have a bit of a giggle, and they forget about it. But groups like mine, Victorian UFO Action, we get out there, we dig for this stuff, and a little bit later I'll tell you about another great case, but that process. But yeah, it's that those cases have really come back to life, and there's lots of things that people can do. There's a great documentary called Westall 66, a suburban mystery, made by Shane Ryan and Rosie Jones. I'd just say everyone's homework for the day. YouTube that video and watch it. It's one of the best UFO documentaries that I've ever seen. I think they've done a tremendous job of it. So that's Westall 66, a suburban mystery. If you YouTube that, you will definitely find it, and I encourage everybody to watch that if you've not seen it.
Okay. Hey, Ben, can you turn your camera off for a minute? I'm going to see if that's you're having a bit of a Skype lag, and I'm going to see if that might cure that. So go ahead and shut your camera if you would. Now, on this particular case you were speaking of, the bending lights, or I think that's what you called it, it's very interesting when you said that the UFO disappeared. I want to talk a little bit about that because there's another question I have. What do you make of that? I've heard of people saying that a UFO all of a sudden just plain disappears.
Well, it's really interesting, and from a lot of stuff that a lot of cases that I look at, you say, well, did the UFO disappear or did it take off? Did it just disappear as in like it just dissolved? Did it disappear as in like it instantly just evaporated, or did it like shoot off from point A to point B and then you never saw it again? So it's a very interesting thing, and I think all those things do happen. I think different UFOs behave in different ways. Ron has said that his UFO shot straight up into the sky, that it disappeared in an instant, that it was gone. It was there and then bang, off it went. So, and other reports that I've looked at, and I've got a really great little one here, where the UFO has gone and there's still been traces of the UFO in the area after its departure. Really weird stuff. So, where are they coming from? That's all linked to that, I think, to the way they behave. If it's a dimensional thing and they can manipulate our space and our time, then there's all manner of things that they can do that. If they're a little bit more advanced than us and it's kind of point A to point B sort of processes going on there, then they've got a hardware that just operates slightly better than our fastest jets can operate, and they're not that far ahead of us. But if they're coming from other dimensions, if they've got some sort of I hate using the word technology because it may not even be a technology in the way that we think about it. They might have the ability to, as I said, manipulate that time and space and do all sorts of things, make it stand still, come and go as they like. So there's a whole hour discussion in that alone, I think, Martin.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So back to the car itself, the first car, the one that did not get in an accident, was there any permanent disfiguration of his headlamps or anything like that, or anything that was unusual about his car after that incident?
No, mundanely, no. The car was as per normal. It didn't have any traces of some sort of mysterious residues, or that its lights were physically bent and they were broken. There was nothing like that. And we tried to find the car. We knew it was a long shot, but we went looking for the car to see if we could find it anywhere. Maybe some collector had it or whatever. But the registration was no longer a current registration. So unfortunately, we couldn't find it. So that was a bit disappointing. They did get the headlight off the crashed car. That was found at the time by Paul Norman, who was the head of VUFOS at the time, or their lead investigator. He found one of the headlights off the crash car. But there was nothing to be revealed from that. And I don't know whether now we would find something that maybe would have been on those lights, but back in the 70s, when he probably tracked down that headlight, there probably wasn't the technology to look at it, and nobody knows where that headlight is now.
Right. Now, going back, you mentioned something when you were talking about the organization that you're head of. There was a previous organization. What was that called again?
That was called VUFOs, Victorian Flying Saucer Research Society.
And a question I have, a number of UFO organizations have faded away in the past, and I just wondered what your thoughts on why that happens, or in particular case of the one you may know of. What makes a membership, does it have anything to do with less sightings, or does a membership just get tired and no new blood, or how can one fail like that?
Well, you just about hit the nail on the head with that last statement. It was an organisation that it was very structured in a kind of an old school kind of a way, with committees and minutes and meetings and all of that type of structure around that thing, like an old school club would be. Perhaps a Rotary club or something. I'm not sure, but it was very much an old school type of structure. The people who were in it for a very, very long time, decades. And what they probably failed to consider was some type of a succession plan. So that when the old stayers' time was up, they didn't have the young blood coming through. They didn't have the people in place to pick up the torch and keep the good work going. And what happened was that basically all their information just scattered to the wind at that point. So it all became lost. Certain people had this and certain people had that, and other bits of information just went outright missing. So it was a real tragedy in the fact that the organisation was around for 40 to 50 years, such a long period of time. And in the end, it just imploded. It just collapsed. They didn't have the people to. The website's still up. You can still go look at the website, but there's no information on there. Hasn't had any updates in years. So
okay, so let's talk about
it. Just grabbed.
Yeah, we have a little bit of a lag here still, and I might have to ask you for your phone number, and I know your country code, so. If you would go ahead and text in the Skype right now, just text your phone number if I lose you, and I'll ring you back. VUFOA, or however you say that, a Victorian UFO action. I just wondered what you actually do with the reports that you get. Are they digitally kept?
Yes, that's right. So we have we have two ways for people to report cases to us. They can do it via email, and interestingly, Martin, we created a hotline. Now the hotlines are very, very problematic. They're rarely used for what they're intended for. The idea of a hotline is that someone is having a real-time UFO experience, can give you a call and report what's going on. It never ends up getting used like that. So we're on the cusp of actually ditching the hotline service. So the majority of our reports, we're now directing people through email.
And how would the thing I always think about is when I personally had a sighting, and that I had just not thought of any way of reporting it. It just didn't occur to me that there was something online. How would someone have found your hotline? Would it have also been only through the internet?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, if you Google, report UFO Victoria, we come up. So we come up if you type in report UFO and you're in our state. We're the first website that'll appear. So it does mean people will get the number. And, it's not that often that I had the phone for quite a while myself, and you'd get the occasional call, but it's usually someone not reporting a UFO. So we found that having that, we still got it, it's still there, in hope that that it'll actually ring with something of interest one day. But for the most part, I think most people in this day and age are probably more comfortable to email you, rather than to phone you. So the idea was that we're looking at a UFO right now. Oh my God, lots of stuff, but it hasn't worked out that way.
I think I'm going to try to ring you on your phone. So, do you have your phone with you? Okay.
I do.
So, yeah, we're getting a lot of lag. So let me try to ring you, and go ahead if you would, and hang up on Skype, and I'll try to ring you back.
Sure thing.
Okay, hang in for the live listener. We're going to try to make this work. And I might end up Skyping him back if this doesn't work. Here we go. Just to can you hear me? There you
Hello.
are. Thank you. So just, it could actually be on my end. To be fair to you, it could be on my end because of this horrific thunderstorms here. First of the year. Anyway, but let's give it a try, see how this goes.
Well, yes. Nothing like a storm.
Okay. Can you say that again?
I said, yes, there's nothing like a storm to throw a bit of chaos.
Yes, right. Okay, so one of the cases I had wanted to bring up to you, and I believe I tried last time we spoke, was there is some case in California where people were driving along a highway and they saw this craft land. Are you familiar with that case?
No. Well, a little bit more detail.
Yeah, I think you're the second Australian that wasn't familiar with it, so maybe I have the wrong country. Very well could.
That's all right, Mark.
Yeah.
Okay.
So let's talk about some of the other. I want to talk about some of the cases that you've been working on that you mentioned earlier that were less known, because those really fascinate me as well. Can you talk about one that comes to mind?
I certainly can. How much time have we got left?
Oh, we got a whole hour.
Oh, good. That's great. That means I can really get stuck into it.
Okay, great.
Okay, well, look, I've got so much really cool stuff, and I hope everyone, go charges their drinks and settles in for a bit of a good listening session here. The case I want to talk about is from my region, which is in eastern Victoria. If you look at the map, it's the pointy end in the east. Basically, this incident is, what I love about this incident is the fact that it occurred to farmers, first of all. And I love farmers. They are pretty much salt of the earth, and they don't have time for nonsense and fun and games. So that I like. The object that they encountered, really unusual object. That's the second thing that I really like about it. So I'll give you a bit of a rundown as to what happened and a little bit of the investigation process that I went through. So this incident occurred at 11 o'clock at night on the 28th of January, 1976. So it's a while ago. But the case itself is an absolute ripper, and I love it. I love it to bits. So who was involved? There was two farmers, and the case occurred in a small town, a really small town called Dargo. That's quite Australian. And Dargo is up in the high country, which is the mountain area in the eastern part of our state. It's about an hour from where I live. So it's very remote. You basically drive in there and you drive out again. That's really what it's like, and it's surrounded by high mountains that are very, very forested, and it's a very remote location. So these two farmers, they were actually what we would call a share farmer. So they were looking after a gherkin crop, which is like pickles, So they'd pick gherkins all day long, and then they'd go home at about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and they'd leave a water pump running to water the crop, if you're following what I'm saying. So they'd go home, they'd leave the water on, the water would water the crop. Then at about 11 o'clock at night, they'd drive back, and it was about a 5 or 6K drive, kilometres I'm saying, back across to the field, and they would turn that pump off, and then they'd drive home again and go to bed. So just, mundane, rural activities. So on this particular night, the 28th of January 1976 at 11 o'clock, they hop in their car and they head off. Now, as they're leaving town, this Dargo is a really small place, they noticed they saw this light buzzing around, and they thought it was a shooter's spotlight. If hunters go at night, they'll have a spotlight, and they'll point the spotlight at a kangaroo, and then they'll blast it to bits. So that's what they thought they were looking at. This little light was out flying around, and all of a sudden, the light took an interest in their car. So they're driving along the road, and the two witnesses were, one was a female, one was a male. She was in her 40s at the time, about 42, and it was her cousin, the male who was driving the car. He was 19. So they're driving in the dark, heading up this road, and this little light that's flying around in the paddock suddenly takes an interest in them. It starts to pace the car. Now, at this stage, they're just a bit puzzled about this light. What's this thing out here? It's following us. So they're driving along. They go through a deep cutting in the road, and they enter a treed section, and the road starts to wind through the trees. At this point, they lose sight of the object, and they just go, well, that was a bit strange, and, we'll just head on our way. They turn off the main road, which is a tar road, over onto a dirt track, and there's a little bridge. As they go over the little bridge, they look across to the right, and they see this white light is right where they are again. What's this thing doing here? Then the light goes up the hill ahead of the car, and they start driving up the hill. The light's gone ahead, and at the top of the hill, the light stops, and it waits for the car to reach the top of the hill. When they reach the top of the hill, they see that the object is a small ball, a sphere. It's about 2 feet across. It has two, I'm going to call them fins, that come out horizontally from it, about a foot or so. And then it has two more fins coming out at a 45 degree at the base. So it's got 2 fins underneath it and 2 fins horizontally. And it has like these are my words, it has like an eye on the front of it. So this small object is hovering just above the farm gate. And as they approach, all of a sudden, the object shines a tremendous blast of light onto the car. And it lit up the entire area for hundreds of feet around like broad daylight. And the witness, when I tracked the witness down, she described it as being a hot heat. This little object that was 2 feet across with its fins shone a tremendous amount of energy, a tremendous amount of light that turned that darkened country location into an absolute daylight situation. So the farmers continue driving. And they were pretty scared by this point in time. So they drive down the hill on the other side, and this object just floats out across next to them on the right, and they can see it up through the trees, and it's following them down to where they have to go to open a gate to go down to where they turn the water off. So as they get to the gate, they jump out of the car, open the gate, drive through, shut the gate. The object's just hovering silently in the sky, following them. They drive down to the river, which I've been out to the location. It's probably around about half a kilometre. They drive down there. They stop the car. The object comes across, and it stops above them, and it waits. As they sit there, scared out of their brains that this thing is taking such an active interest in them. One of them jumps out, turns the pump off. They hop back in the car. They squeal the tyres, and they drive back across the field at about 60 miles an hour. Really scared. The object follows them back up. They hastily go through the gate, back up the hill. When they get to the top of the hill again, this little object shines another tremendous blast of light over their car. They drive down, back onto the main road, and then they drive home. White as ghosts when they get out. The woman's mother says, "What happened to you?" And we said, "We just had this horrible, horrible experience out on the road where this light just chased us and shone this tremendous light on us." So when I read about this case, which was given to me by one of my team members in an old yellowed Australian UFO bulletin, I thought to myself, this is a really good case. It's a really great little case. I want to try and find out, where this occurred. And fortunately, the description had a really good description of where it occurred. Now, I kind of knew the area, but not intimately. So me and my partner Lana, we hopped in the car and we basically drove up to Dargo, and we spent an afternoon reading the information that we had. There was no street names listed or road names listed. We just had to go purely by description in this yellowed old journal. And we went into Dargo and we asked at the general store, does anyone know about it? And we sort of, didn't really get anywhere there because the people were quite new. They'd only been in Dargo for 5 years, not like 40, 50 years. So we hopped back in our car and we drove back out, and we found the road, and we followed the whole track through the deep cutting, the bridge, up the hill, down the hill. We found the exact gate where the object had shone the brilliant display of light over the car. And so we were really stoked. We were happy that we'd found this actual location. So we were able to follow the exact route that the witnesses had taken. We were able to go right down to the farm gate. We didn't go onto the private property, but we drove right down to the farm gate. We had a good handle on the geography of what they had done, of the experience. So, and they said that the object seemed to go higher as they went down to the paddock. But the thing was with that basically the object didn't descend; it just stayed at the exact height. They descended down to where the fence was, and the object just remained at the same trajectory from the height. So that's what they actually did. So we had a really good handle on the geography of it. And when we went back home that night, I actually posted onto Facebook that we'd been to Dargo. We'd done this little investigation, and one of my friends on Facebook said to me, "I'm from Dargo. Perhaps I can find out a bit more information for you." And so what she did was she said, "My auntie lives up there. She's been there for 40, 50 years. I'll ask her." So she asked her auntie, and gave me her auntie's phone number, and I rang her, and she said, "Oh, yes, oh, that'll be Mary. Mary had a strange encounter 40 years ago. I go and I water her ducks every day for her. So if you want to come, we'll go around and we can have a chat with her."
Wow. Small world, huh?
So we got very, very lucky by yeah. So we got very, very lucky that that was actually the case. So we went back to Dargo the following weekend, and we were able to go and meet the original witness, who's now in her 80s, and we were able to have a chat with her. Now, the woman was terrified, absolutely terrified, and she didn't even really want to talk about it. And this is one thing that investigators have to remember, that, these people have had to them it's a horrible experience. And we basically, we had to talk, sit down, and we had a cup of tea with her and some scones or biscuits, as you guys call them. And we sat there and we spoke about cooking walnuts and all sorts of stuff. And eventually we got around to, being able to earn her trust and start talking about the incident. And she confirmed to us that this was an absolutely horrible experience. She had lived in Dargo her entire life, and since that incident, she said she never drove around Dargo at night, ever. Ever since that incident in 1976, she never drives around there at night. So she was very, very, very scared of what had occurred to her. Now, they also knew the young man who was her cousin, and they said, "Look, give him a ring. He might talk to you." And he'd be in his 60s now, or late 60s. So, funny story is he actually lived about 60 metres away from where I lived at the time, and basically I rang him up, and he didn't want to talk about it.
Hey, can you?
So he said, "I'm not."
Yeah, can you hold just
Hello?
1 minute? I'm going to start you right here. But what's going to happen is I'm understanding that it must be on my side because we're still having the lag. So maybe you want to get your little pooch there and put him on your lap, and I'm going to call you back on Skype after I restart Skype. I hear your little doggy in the background. Yeah. All right. So I'm going to call you right back. I'm going to reboot Skype, and hang in there, live listener. We'll get this thing straightened out, and I'm hoping it's on my side, and we'll just give it another call here as soon as Skype restarts. And you're welcome to pose some questions. Matter of fact, I have some questions coming up in the forum if anyone would like to do that. New window. Hang on. Okay. All right. And I'm going to try Ben back again. Okay, so seems to be ringing Here we go. Hello,
Hello.
there. So, yes, it does sound better. The sound is so much better on Skype than it is on your phone for some reason. So you were right at the point where you were talking about the younger one, and you just said that he had absolutely no interest in talking to you. And so if you can continue from that point on.
That's yeah, sure thing. And sorry about the dogs. The postman turned up, so that's just a bit too. They get a bit excited. So yeah, it was because we'd done a lot of work in tracking down where they were, and was so lucky to get to speak to the female witness. I was devastated when the cousin decided that he didn't want to talk to me. And I suppose we'd just gotten on a roll with the whole thing. And it's a caution I have for investigators is the fact that, you're having results, you're getting somewhere, you still are going to hit little snags at different points in time. And the reason why I was disappointed that I couldn't speak to the second witness was because he was younger than her, and she was definitely in her mid-80s by the time we got to talk to her. So, it's a long time ago for her, and she's a lot older. He would have been a lot younger, and I would have been, and he was driving as well. So I would have been really, really, really happy to talk to him. And it's not to say that it won't happen; it still might. But at this point in time, that conversation hasn't occurred. So that was a little bit disappointing. So that's the basics of that particular incident. And it would have been lost. Now it's been preserved. I wrote an article in Ufologist magazine here in Australia about that case and about the process that we went through to bring it back to life. So it's now preserved. We went up to Dargo last weekend and we shot on location where it occurred. So I've done a video for VUFOA TV that will can be up shortly, where people can actually watch the entire where they went and I talk about it at different points. So that's one example of one little case that's going to make it into my book. That stands out for me as a good close encounter to everyday Australians.
Yes, I mentioned just a second ago that I have a number of questions in our forum. I just looked; we have like 15 of them, so I'm going to get to those. I personally think that cases where someone doesn't want to talk about it, I think those are the best cases, because they're absolutely not looking for any type of fame at all. They just kind of want it to go away. And to me, that just gives a lot more credibility.
It certainly does, and like there's no way known we could have spoken to her if we had just lobbed into town. There's no way known that we could have spoken to this woman. We had to get local trust to achieve that.
Sure. Okay, so one of the questions here, you mentioned this real briefly, but what's your personal opinion on the Fred Valentek disappearance in his light aircraft? First of all, I think that is an amazing, kind of like an abduction of a plane, or it sure seemed like it anyway, with all the noises and all that. Can you, for the person that is unfamiliar with that, can you just give a real quick encapsulation of what the story is, and then go ahead and answer that question?
Certainly. So on October 21st, 1978, Fred Valentik was flying his Cessna light aircraft from Moorabbin Airport in Melbourne to King Island, which is a small island between Victoria and Tasmania. He was going over there to pick up some crayfish for some military friends because he was in the cadets and he had been involved in cadets and things like that. So he was going over there to pick that up. So he left a bit late that day. He was meant to take off at around about 6 p.m. and he didn't get away for about 20 minutes later. And it was his first nighttime flight. That's the other interesting and perhaps a key point for this case. It was the first time he'd flown at night. And he was an experienced pilot, and he was working towards becoming a commercial pilot. So he took off, and so at that time, the day was a very nice and clear day. So the sun was setting, and up at about the altitude that he was at, he could see quite clearly. And so he heads out across and down to the tip of Victoria, and he makes a turn and he starts heading out over the water. Basically, at this point, something starts to interact with him while he is in the sky. and he has a conversation with the flight services officer who was on duty at Tullamarine Airport. Now, flight services is different to an air traffic controller. Flight services are there to help pilots and troubleshoot issues with them and things like that, rather than purely plotting where they actually are. So the flight services officer was Steve Roby. And this very famous conversation now occurred between the pilot and the flight services officer. And basically, to keep a shorter version of it, an object started buzzing his aircraft as he was flying along. His aircraft started coughing. It started having some sort of issue, and he basically ended up saying that there's an object hovering above me, and it's not an aircraft. He initially asked, is there any known air traffic? Is the RAF doing anything? He was just trying to find out who might have been up there with him on that evening. And when he found out that there was nobody up there who was meant to be up there, it became a bit strange. So the transcript of what he actually says is readily available. You can Google that anytime, and you can read that transcript between Fred Valentich and the flight services officer Steve Roby. So that was, and basically he disappeared. So he says it's hovering above me. It's not an aircraft. Then there's a strange metallic sort of a scraping sound, like a ball bearing rattling around in a tin, that sort of a noise for about 17 seconds at the end of the recording. And then he's gone, no trace. They started looking for him straight away, and they looked for him for 2 weeks. They found no sign of the plane. They found no wreckage. They found no oil slicks. They found nothing. That plane literally just disappeared into thin air. So, and on that particular day, all up and down the coastline of Victoria, there was an absolute UFO flap. There was reports of UFOs up and down that western Victorian coastline. A man who was on holidays took some photographs at that time and caught a really unusual object on the same night that Fred disappeared. So it was 1978 is another key year in our UFO history here in Victoria. So what happened to him? I mean, that's the big question. What happened to him? Logic would say he ended up in Bass Strait. You'd have to say that a plane with a coughing engine is going to go down and he's going to end up in the water. But there was no evidence to suggest that he did do that he ended up in the water. They didn't find anything. So, and that's unusual. Cessna's a fairly light aircraft, Even if it crashed into the water, there'd be bits broken off it, and they'd float around out there. So it'd be highly unusual for a Cessna to impact on the water, instantly sink to the bottom, I would say.
Exactly. And another thing is there's always an oil or gas slick, as they say, that just spreads really, really far. A drop of gasoline spreads pretty far. So usually when something like a plane hits the water, not only is there floating debris, but there's also that sign that they do look for.
Yes.
Okay, another question is, and thank you for that, I always thought that was a really fascinating and very spooky case.
It is very spooky.
With the vastness of the Australian outback, have there been any reports of unexplained ground markings like crop circles in remote areas? I've never heard of crop circles there. Has that ever happened?
Yes, yeah. Don't think like England. Where you get these intricate artworks in fields in England. We don't tend to have that here in Australia, but there has been multitudes of landing trace evidence, is what I would like to call it. There have been circles in wheat fields up in the western districts, the top of Victoria, the top northwestern part of Victoria is basically desert country. And they do grow wheat up in that part of the world up there. And there's a great case up there on a particular farm where they had the combine harvesters were out harvesting the wheat, and it was only because they were so high up in the combine harvesters that they could see these compressed circles in the wheat field.
Wow.
And one of the investigators from VUFOS went up there, and he basically said it was absolutely compressed to the ground. It was as if some type of a heavy weight had compressed, and the soil had been basically almost baked in the way that it had been compacted, and digging through it was very, very hard. he got sick as well when he was in that vicinity. So it was that's a really good example of what happened. And that farm kind of had some other strange stuff happen too. The owners came home one day and they saw this bright light hovering in the paddock, and all the sheep had run over to the other side of the paddock, and here's this bright light. And so the bright light takes off and they walk out into the paddock, and the animals are terrified, and they find this eagle on the ground, and this eagle is wandering around as if it's completely dazed. It couldn't fly, it couldn't do anything. So that was a really strange incident that occurred on the same property. So yes, we do. To answer the question from the listener, absolutely, there's been a great array of crop, say call it crop circles, but I prefer to call it landing trace case evidence around our state where things have touched down. Farmers know their properties. You know, they know when something strange has occurred, even if they didn't see it like the following day. So yes, there's a long history of that.
Okay, this is a great question up on the forum. The 1993 Kelly Cahill case was mentioned on an X-Files reboot episode last year. Mulder cites the case to test someone's knowledge of ET cases. What can you tell us about this actual case? And then in parentheses, as a joke, he says, just in case we run into Mulder one day and he gives us the same test.
I like that. Look, this case has the potential to be probably the best case in the world, and I say that with true seriousness. Has the potential. It's not the greatest case in the world, but it definitely has the potential to be. So what again, I'm trying to encapsulate things for you in a brief format, not give you the full story, but basically one night on August 8th, in the middle of winter, in the mid-90s, this lady and her husband had been driving up to visit a friend, and they were on their return journey. On the way up, she had seen a UFO. It was these big, bright orange lights that was circular, and she'd seen it sitting, hovering silently. When they came back down, they saw this same object out in a field. At that time, now it's all housing there, but back in the 90s, it was just a field. And I've been to the location. Out in the field, here's this big, bright, amber-coloured circles, about 4 or 5 of them. And standing within those little amber lights, they can see little silhouettes of beings standing there. So they stopped their car and they got out and they looked, wow, what the hell's this? And then another car stopped a bit further down the road. And then another car stopped a bit further down. So this is where the case becomes really, really good, because it had independent witnesses in 3 vehicles, all looking at a high strangeness event. Often it's just the one party or the one person, or and they're all connected. These people were not connected to each other in any way. They've all just stopped on this dark road in the middle of the night, And what happens then is a blue light, a blue beam appears underneath the craft, and this blue beam comes down to the ground and lights it up in a sort of a bluish glow underneath the object. Then all of a sudden these figures appear. These humanoid figures appear at the base of the blue beam. Sounds very science fiction-y. And then all of these beings are tall and skinny and black, and their eyes all of a sudden light up bright red, and they're like a fly's eye, big fly eyes on these dark faces. Then these beings all instantly shoot across the paddock towards the witnesses. Actually, sorry, one thing happened before that. A pulse came out from the object, and it's been described as being like when you're at a concert and the bass drums banging into you at a concert. It was like that type of effect. This burst of energy came from the craft, and it knocked them off their feet. Then those littered up beings came gliding across the paddock towards where they were, and that's the basics of that particular case. So it's really it was a very complex case with multiple witnesses, trace evidence in the field. There was marks on the ground that had been left there when the object had departed, and it was a case that got political in the end, and it basically got shut down, and it's not really discussed. The witnesses of the primary witness has disappeared, which is Kelly. The other witnesses were never publicly identified, so we don't know who they are. They're not available to talk to. So that's where I said this case has the potential to be one of the best cases in history, but it's hampered by the fact that it doesn't have the availability of the witness for discussion now, or the corroborative witnesses who were there on that particular night.
Wow. Yeah, that is interesting. What about the 1980 Rosdale case where the UFO drained a large water tank?
That's another really outstanding case, and I'm glad you brought it up, because it's probably also one of the best cases that has occurred, a very strong case. It was on September 30, 1980, again at about 1 a.m., again in a dark, remote location, it's where UFOs like to turn up. And a farmer was asleep in his bed, and he was awoken by all his animals going absolutely ballistic. The cows were mooing, and the horse was whinnying, and the dogs were barking. The whole place was just a cacophony of noise. And he looked outside and he saw this object drifting across from the west, go over his shearing shed and head out into the paddock, and all the animals are running around scared out of their skulls. So he hops on his little farmer's motorbike and he drives out, and he decides to follow the object. And the object goes about a good several hundred meters away from him, and it hovers over a big concrete water tank. And it actually hovers above the water tank, sets down on top of the tank, and again, a pulse comes out from that object, and he's knocked off his bike. The object takes off from the tank, lands on the ground next to it, sits on the ground for a while, and then it takes off and disappears into the east. So he was very sick, and for the next 5 days he was very ill. He could hardly get out of bed, and his watch stopped at about 1 o'clock that night as well. The animals ran around for another week. The animals were so distressed. Wow. They were absolutely terrified. And when investigators got there, and the following day, the farm owner had come, because he was actually a farm manager who had the experience. They saw that all the water in the tank had been drained out, gone. All the water was gone, and he knew the tank was full the previous day because he'd checked it. All the water had gone, and all the sediment had been swirled up into a 1/2 meter swirl in the bottom of the water tank. So it was a really, really, really strong case that occurred. Now, I just want to digress slightly and talk about another case briefly that occurred in Sale, which Sale is an Air Force base town that's nearby to where this occurred. A policeman was out at 4:40 in the morning one morning doing his rounds, and he saw this object travelling through the sky, and he watched it descend to the ground and then take off again. So he drove to the local Air Force base, and he said, "You guys got anything out there? What's going on? I want to know." They said, no, there's nothing. So one of the RAF guys hopped in the car with him. They drove back out there. They saw this object approaching them in the squad car, and the object came and it stopped over the car, and it shone bright light down over the car. And they were outside of the squad car, and they were just standing there. Then the object took off into the sky, but the light remained. So the object went away, but the light remained around the car and around the men for some time. The light had been left over the policeman and the RAF investigator. Really interesting little short case, just as an aside, in that same area.
Isn't that strange? And is that called East Sale, Victoria?
That's correct. It's the East Sale RAF base. Very, very interesting base. I could talk to you for half an hour about the East Sale RAF base and give everybody some really interesting stuff about that. That's just one case that occurred quite close to it. Even US military who had been at the base doing training reported a sighting while they were on patrol at the RAF base. There's reports from around the small towns that surround it. a very, very interesting area. That entire RAF base, sail base area. It's a sleepy little base. It's now basically a training base. They've spent millions of dollars upgrading it in recent years, but it has a very strong UFO history and a very strong UFO connection for such a small, almost insignificant base. It has a lot of UFO activity.
Would you consider it a UFO hotspot, more or less?
I would. I absolutely would go so far as to say that over the years there's been a strong progression of cases that have occurred around that area. So including Rosedale, which is literally from the Sale RAF base, you'd be there in 20 minutes. So it's not far from the Sale RAF base. The policeman was only probably about 10 minutes away from the RAF base when he had his encounter. The SAS guys the American SAS guys doing their training there were on the base when they saw these lights descend out of the sky, and they described them as doing ballet. The lights were revolving and spinning and interacting with each other, and then they all lifted back up into the sky again. That was from US servicemen in the area. So yes, there's another report from Stratford, which is about 15 minutes away from the base, where a woman woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning to let her cat outside. She looked out the window and she saw what she described as a carousel of lights hanging silently in the sky. And she looked out the other window and there's another one, exactly the same.
Wow.
So yes, I would say that there's a good case to suggest that there is a UFO interest in that part of our state. Having said that, the central part of our state, which is Ballarat Bendigo, for those of you on Google Maps avidly looking it up, that's another area where there's a strong UFO history in the centre of our state as well. Really strong cases come out of there. So yeah. Anyway, I don't want to keep going on if people have more questions.
That is always it always interests me when there's a certain area. You know, I'm thinking a military base. That is definitely probably a possible attraction. I often wonder why there is an attraction that actually makes a area a hotspot, and sometimes there's say mineral deposits or something unusual in an area. I don't really know if there's any answers, just like this whole topic, if there's any answers at all. Go ahead.
So I was going to say that area where the Sale RAF base actually is a very fertile area. It's got a big irrigation scheme there, the McAllister irrigation scheme, and it's a very rich dairy area. So there's dairy farms all over the place. It's a very, and there's big lagoons and things like that. There's another brief case happened not far away. A farmer's lagoon was drained of water, and there were strange markings on the ground next to him about 6 months after the Rosedale case occurred. So there was a water drain from a lagoon and marks on the ground. You know, guy in Traralgon, which is the next town along from Sale, heading towards Melbourne, a guy was riding his bike to work in the early hours of the morning, and this UFO just silently appears behind him and follows him as he's riding his bike at 4 o'clock in the morning to work, and it shines a light on him as he's riding his bike. So it's very, very curious that these guys are out there, and they take great curiosity in looking at what we're doing.
Right. Now, any cattle mutilations? You just mentioned a cattle-rich area.
It's a cattle-rich area, but not so much mutilations. I haven't found any history of mutilations here. Not a single report of mutilations, which you could say be quite unusual, but it just doesn't really occur here. I don't have a single case where a cattle has been found mutilated. We've got lots of missing water.
Yeah.
But we don't seem to have. Well, I haven't. Not to say that it hasn't happened, but I don't have a case of mutilation in Victoria. I'm still digging. If I find one, I'll be sure to let you know.
Sure. Excellent. So you mentioned earlier about this one farmer. I think you said it was a farmer who actually became ill after his encounter.
Yeah.
Was that a long-term effect, or did he get over that?
It was about 5 days, I believe.
I wonder what made him sick.
So it was crook. Well, I reckon it was the beam that hit him.
Mm-hmm.
I reckon that when the object pulsed him, I like to call it a good pulsing. When the object pulsed him, that was probably when it did, or there might have been some. Like, you shouldn't run up to a UFO. I don't think it's necessarily a great idea. These things are emitting things that we don't know what they're emitting, So if he had sort of a radiation type of an effect where he was ill in bed and couldn't get out of bed and was really sick, then that indicates that, we shouldn't be perhaps running up to these things and putting our hand. Not that he did that, but, they should always be approached with caution.
Now, you mentioned earlier the other pulse that the people felt. Did they have any illness from that? They did too.
Yes, they did. Yeah. Kelly became quite ill after that, and she had issues with her reproductive parts as a result of that, and she went to hospital for a number of days.
Now, this is kind of strange probably to ask, but any missing time?
Well, Kelly's case is a missing time case. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, absolutely. That's a missing time case. It took them a long time to draw out from her. She slowly started to remember what had actually happened, and there's still so many questions around, what happened, and she's the only one that has any type of testimony, because she wrote a book at the time called Encounters by Kelly Cahill. You can't get it now. It's not been published anymore, but you can find it on eBay and different Amazon, perhaps, if you get a second-hand copy. They're quite expensive, but you can find copies of it, sort of that people have got out there. I've got about 2 copies myself, but that's a missing time case. It's probably the most famous missing time case that I can think of off the top of my head. Most of the other cases that I've seen in recent times have been people being terrified in the night.
Ah, okay.
So funny little segue back to Dargo. When we were up there, just briefly, the lady who we met up there, not the witness, but the one who introduced us to the witness, the facilitator of that, she said to me, we had a couple of strange things happen here too. I said, well, please tell me by all means. She said, my husband and my son were driving along one night halfway between Dargo and Bairnsdale, and this bright light hovered over their car. They couldn't drive it. They couldn't steer it. The car just stopped being able to steer. The light took them down the road, and then it basically released the car, and it took off again. And I thought, well, that's a relatively significant event. And then she said to me, and one night when I was in bed, when we were living out on another property, I woke up in the middle of the night and there were all these lights swirling around outside. I could hear this whooshing sound, and I could hear this, they mumble. She said, they mumble. I could hear this mumbling. And she said, I was terrified. I pulled the blankets over my head and I didn't get out of bed. So stuff just comes to you.
With the low population there's a lot more sightings than I thought. What is your organization per year? Or do you think a lot of the cases go to MUFON, or do you think you get a good part of them?
Oh, look, yeah, that's an interesting question. Not much goes to MUFON. They only report about 3 to 6 cases a month out of Australia, so they don't get much from here because they're not really set up here in a way to fully capture that. And the other thing too is to capture reports nationally is quite difficult. Mm-hmm. Each state has a really good UFO group in each state. New South Wales, Queensland, Tasmania, South Australia, they've all got their individual UFO groups, but the overall model of an overriding body has not really worked. No one's had the resources to make it work. That's the first thing. So, yeah, we do capture a number of reports. It varies. We can go months without even getting a report. And then you'll get, a couple come in in a rush. You'll get 5 or 6 reports come in, in quick succession. None of them related, but you'll get 5 or 6 reports come in. We've got over 200 cases in our database, which has been going for 5 years. So you could probably do the maths and extrapolate that out for an average or something like that. But it hasn't happened that way. Like they tend to come in fits and starts. So winter can be quieter than summer. Because everyone's inside at night, no one's outside. Summertime, you get more reports in the summertime. So but that's not to say that you're not going to get something great in June, because obviously Kelly Cahill occurred in August, which is winter over here for you guys. You're summer over there, winter over here. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's and the other states around Australia, they get their reports as well. And there's been fits and starts on, national reporting and that type of thing, but no one's been able to make it work at this point in
But do
time.
you cooperate with other organizations?
One thing in Australia is we have great cooperation. That is absolutely true. It hasn't always been that way. There's been the politics of ufology in the past, but currently in the 21st century, from Victoria, New South Wales, Queensland, we all get on very, very well. We will help each other out. We've done events together. We've brought speakers from America out here together. We had Richard Doland here last year. He came out and I hosted him in VUFOA, Victorian UFO Action. We hosted him in Melbourne here. He went to New South Wales, he went to Queensland, he went to Western Australia. So we all worked together with bringing out some international speakers because it's hard for Australia because we're so far away and it's quite expensive. But when we pool our resources between the states, we were able to get some people to come out. So yeah, it's a good, healthy working relationship.
Great. So what are some of the shapes that people have been reporting for anomalous craft? How about triangles? Are there a lot of triangle sightings?
I've got a really good one for you. And we didn't even discuss this before we came on, so that's really good. Got a really great case. Yes, to answer the question, yes, there is those sort of cases that occur. Now, I've got a really, really good one that occurred. It's relatively recent, I suppose. It occurred in April 2016, in the early hours of the morning at about 5 o'clock in the morning. And where did it occur? It occurred in Rosebud, which is Melbourne's got a really big bay there, a big bay, natural bay of water. And as you travel out of Melbourne, there's these little suburbs that go all the way around. And once you get to the bottom of the bay, there's an area called Rosebud, which is right down on the Bass Strait area. So it's right near the Bass Strait where Fred Valentich disappeared. So this guy was an aeronautical engineer by profession, and he was absolutely no dummy at all in terms of what he was able to report to us about what he saw. And so what he saw was he got up at 5 o'clock in the morning, which was his usual time for getting up, and he was going over to make coffee at the sink. And his kitchen window looked outside, and he saw an object hovering through the window. And he went outside and stood on the back lawn, and he saw this triangular-shaped object hovering in the sky that he described as being about maybe 500 metres away from where he was. 500 metres to a kilometre is his estimation as to how far away it was. And there was 3 points of light on each point of the triangle. So there was obviously a light source on each of those points. And when he came out, he saw that the lights went out. The light, as he walked out the back door, the lights on the object turned off. And as his eyes accustomed, he saw that it was triangular shaped. He went inside and he grabbed a really strong LED spotlight that he had, and he shone that light onto the object. But the object wouldn't reflect. It wouldn't reflect at all. It was absorbing the light. As he shone his big bright beam from his backyard, it was absorbing the light. A weird light, he described it. He said he could see the clouds behind the object, but his light was being absorbed by the object. Now, this is where it gets a bit spooky. The object shone a light on him, and it lit up the entire area with a white light. Brilliant. All the trees, all the power lines, birds started chirping due to the light. And the illumination lasted for about 30 to 45 seconds. The lights dimmed back to their original brightness, and then the object disappeared incredibly fast to the southwest over the ocean.
Wow.
So that's a good example of a triangular craft. And I rang this witness and I spoke to him directly, and he's absolutely full on with his recollection, and he gave me all the coordinates and GPS positions and everything like that. So he was very, very good.
That reaction I've heard a number of times, where someone flashes a light and it flashes back, or there's some type of interaction going on there, which is pretty amazing, really.
Yeah. Absolutely. It really is. It's an incredible one. And another brief recent one that we had too, which is I just want to touch on briefly, was up in the desert country, perhaps heading up towards where that farm had the combine harvesters and the circles on the ground, up sort of a bit south of that area, but still in that sort of zone. During the middle of the day recently, a lady was driving there with her daughter on a highway. This big truck comes up behind them. It's basically a road rage incident. And she starts filming it with her iPhone, and the truck overtakes them quite dangerously. They're scared in the car, and she films it going past. She swears at the truck. And interestingly, in the film, she captures a little sphere that I would describe about the size of maybe a softball or maybe a basketball at biggest. And it comes in from the left of the screen, and it zigzags across the truck, top of the truck, and then it exits right of screen, this silver sphere. And they didn't see it at the time, which is an interesting thing. And I think that, obviously cameras perhaps do have the potential to capture it. And she sent me the footage. She sent me photos of the car, the location. I did all that. So I've got a good little report on it. And just recently, another guy sent me another picture from an air show, which was on this year down at Laverton. They have a big air show, and they have military jets there and all that paraphernalia. And this guy sends me a photo of an FA-18 plane in the air, and behind it is an object exactly the same as what the woman had in her video over when the truck went past. It's exactly the same. And I thought to myself, gee, that's strange. She captures it on her iPhone. This guy's taken a photo, and here's this little round object in both separate things that look exactly the same. And it's highly unlikely that a jet fighter is going to drop bits off it. I've spoken to friends in the RAF, and they've said, look, those planes don't drop bits. Bits don't fall off strike aircraft.
Right. Do you think it's possible that this could be some type of video or camera anomaly?
Well, that's interesting. I mean, I would say not. You can always look at a smudge on a photo and go, it's a bird, it's a bug. You can always say that. But, I mean, obviously the photos probably need further analysis by people who can, who are quite good at that sort of thing, and I'd be happy to share that with people who can do it. But basically, when you look at this footage of this object that comes across the truck, it's basically like a cannonball sort of an object just appears. And it appears left, does a zigzag, goes over the top of the truck, and then it zigs off out of screen. It's totally under its own control. It wasn't debris sucked up by the truck. It's not a balloon. It doesn't appear to be some type of a emulsion issue with the camera that doesn't have emulsion. So it's curious.
I'd be very interested in seeing that, to pass it along to Mark D'Antonio to get his opinion of an analysis of that, if you'd like. And we can talk about that off air.
We can arrange that,
So another question and you had mentioned an illumination case. Was that the 1972 Constable Jarvis, or was that a different one?
That's the Constable Jarvis, yes, 1972.
That's the one you mentioned before?
That's the one I mentioned before,
yes.
With the light that remained over the car once the object disappeared.
Right. Okay, I just wanted to make sure that was the same one, because that was a question in here. And here is another question I wanted to, it's kind of a long one. Are you familiar with the claims of research physicist Stan Deyo, author of the book, The Cosmic Conspiracy?
No.
He's someone that migrated to the U.S. From Australia, I guess, to do research. Okay, no problem. So I would like to hear another case that's kind of an unheard of, interesting. These are really fascinating, so I'm really enjoying them.
Yeah, I've got heaps of them. They really are. I've just got them, and as I said, I'm going through putting this book together, cataloguing all these little cases that have occurred over the years, and there's some absolutely fascinating ones that are out there. So yeah, look, all right, I've got okay. What else can I hit you?
Yeah,
with?
I'd like to hear one of the unusual smaller cases that don't get a lot of airtime. If you have anything else, you can tell us.
I certainly do. So I love police cases.
Oh, me too.
They're practically my favourite. And farmers and police are my two favourites, hands down. because neither of them have got time for BS, basically. Particularly policemen, and they're usually relatively unimaginative police officers. They're pretty direct in the way that they speak, and you know, they're not prone to nonsense, which I think makes them very, very credible. So this case is an absolute. It should be all over the History Channel. It really should, and I don't understand why no one's picked up on the case like this, because it would make great television for the History Channel or National Geographic or Discovery. This case occurred in 1993 in Melbourne. So this is a metropolitan case rather than Ben and his dark country road stuff. This is a city-based case, and what happened was, in west of Melbourne, no one will be familiar with the Melbourne suburbs, but there's a little satellite town called Melton. And at the time, in 1983, it was pretty much a country town, but now it's built up out there. There's housing estates everywhere, and it's not what it was in 1983. But one particular night, there was two constables, or two police officers, out in their divvy wagon, as we would call it, or their squad car, driving around, and they're out on the outskirts of Melton, going down to some areas to check where people go down and get up to mischief. And they turn around, they come back, and they're driving back into Melton. They look up, and above the shopping centre, they can see a bright light hovering above the shopping centre. They look at each other and they go, that shouldn't be there. And they drive these roads all the time, so they're very familiar with what should and shouldn't be out there. So they drive back into Melton, and they drive straight to the shopping centre. They hop out of their car and they look up, and here's this object hovering very low above the shopping centre, only 30, 40 feet above it, really low. And all they can see is this gantry. They shine their little squad cars, had a little spotlight in it, and they shine this spotlight up at this object that's hovering just above the shopping centre. And they can see this gantry, like if you think of a windmill, like an old-fashioned windmill with its cross struts and that sort of thing, they can see this in the spotlight. And it's making a kind of a low humming noise. And they're looking at it in this light. And they can't see much else because that's all they could report. And they're standing there and they contemplated putting a zinger in it, as he called it, taking out their guns and shooting at it. But then they thought, no, it's probably not a good idea to shoot it above the shopping centre. So the object took off, and they started following it. And they're following it around out in the country. Another object appears, and this object is shaped like a mattress, and it's got a light underneath it, and another light, and it's floating around out there as well. And these policemen are out driving around, and these objects are floating around, and the objects are very low. And as they're going along, they see them rise and fall, rise and fall. And when we spoke to the policeman, he said it was probably that low that it was jumping over fences. So as it's going along, it's rising over a fence, going flat, rising over another fence, and going. And they chase these things all over the place. They go back to the police station after a while, and for a break, and they say, look, there's this weird stuff going on out there. This is the basic version. And so the inspector, the sergeant, and all the other police officers go outside, and approaching the police station is this mattress-type object floating silently in the air, and it passes over the police station, witnessed by the inspector, by the sergeant, by everybody. They follow this object down to a military antenna array. There was at the time, it's not there now, there was an intelligence gathering listening station just down the road from where Melton is. And this object, the floating mattress one, goes right down to where the intelligence antenna array is, and it basically is so low it's going to hit the antennas. And as it's approaching the antennas, it does a slight manoeuvre, and it manoeuvres around the antennas and takes off again. These officers were from Melton, and additional police officers from the suburb of Sunshine chased these objects around for over 5 hours, all night long. Wow. They chased them around out in the country roads, not knowing what they were. So we found that constable, and we contacted one of the constables. We found him and we contacted him. He's still in Victoria Police today, and he's now a senior inspector with a high-ranking responsibility in Victoria Police. And he met us out at a suburban hotel, And we chatted to him for about 90 minutes, and we had a great conversation with it. And with his pragmatic policeman attitudes, he was like, we don't know what we saw. We want it to be explainable, but we can't explain it. So he had a real problem with the fact that what they had seen, they could not put into any kind of context as to what these silent objects were that were floating around in the middle of the night on the outskirts of Melbourne in 1983.
Nice.
So it's a great case. It really is. You just imagine it, guys. Police officers in their squad cars driving around chasing mysterious floating objects in the sky. I mean, I know there's cases in America.
Right. Yes. Yeah, there's cases where there's been, town after town of police officers chasing, one object through different counties and things like that you hear about. I do love those cases myself. What was the ending of that whole witnessing? Did it just take off?
Yeah, they just disappeared. Like as the dawn was arising, these objects just disappeared. So they just disappeared, and it actually, believe it or not, the case actually made it into the media. And if you go onto our website, we have the actual video of the Channel 7 news report the following day. And the Channel 7, I don't know how they got a hold of it, but they got wind of it. And they went out to Melton, and interestingly enough, the policemen were happy to speak to them about it. The inspectors on there, the sergeants on there, they talked to the two constables. They go to the shopping centre, they film the shopping centre. They say that Tullamarine Airport saw nothing at the time on their radar, and they Channel 7 fly their helicopter up in the same area, and Tullamarine report that, yes, they can see them quite clearly. They can see the Channel 7 helicopter, no problem, which is in the same areas where these objects were hovering around. So Channel 7 put in a bit of effort into investigating it, and they recorded it, and that's on our website, www.vufoa.com. You can go watch that very report that came out the next day.
Wow, that's great. So if someone goes to your website, the association's website, well, first of all, can you give that out?
Certainly. So I don't mind my Australian accent, but it's www.vufoa.com.
Oh, .com. Okay, not AU. Okay, and can the listener go on that website and actually read about some of these sightings?
Not these. Yeah, there might be a little bit about Melton on there, but none of this other stuff will be on there. This is all the work that I'm working on at the moment with my team to bring this stuff out in some type of a format that people can access via hopefully what I'm going to have produced pretty soon. Well, in the next few months, I'll hopefully have a book or booklet available.
Okay, so as far as someone doing like research in Australia or something like that, that's not really a tool. That website's not really a tool for that.
Well, it is. It's a resource. I mean, there's lots of information on there about. We've got all sorts of videos on there, for instance, archival videos. So you can go watch videos about, Fred Valentich or whatever. And if people go to our YouTube channel, that's the easiest way to access most of those videos. So that was VUFOA TV, VUFOA TV. If you Google that, then you'll see most of our videos occur under our channel.
Okay. Now I know the Outback is an area where there's very, very low population, but is there any key sightings of historical sightings in the Outback?
Oh, there certainly is. It's outside of my area. It's not where I'm based, but over in the Outback area, there's been lots of. I suppose a lot of it's relatively anecdotal to a certain extent. You can drive out to the middle of the Northern Territory to a town called Wycliffe Well, which claims to be the Australian UFO capital.
Really? Wow.
And there's all sorts of I mean, what would it be like? Middle of the Northern Territory would be like being in the Nevada desert or Arizona somewhere. Like it's arid, red dirt country. So it's pretty dark, pretty lonely, pretty sparsely populated. there's lots of reports from people out there driving around, encountering all sorts of strange lights out there. There's Aboriginal stories of UFOs and historical contact with all sorts of beings. If you go through the rich Aboriginal history, that's a big job in itself that probably needs more work by a dedicated researcher.
I see. Okay. Well, great. It's been. I hope when you do write your book that you make sure that you get in touch with me, because I'd like to know. Do you have any plans for actually getting it done and published and all that?
Yeah, I do. I think it'll probably come out in the next 3 to 4 months.
Oh, that soon! Wow.
Hopefully. Yeah, I've really got to burn the midnight oil and get stuck into it. Basically, I've got to go up to Cairns in Queensland in October to do a presentation at a UFO festival up in far north Queensland, and I hope to have it ready to take up there if I can, or at least a shortened version of it at that point, and I can always expound on it because I've only just touched the thin edge of the wedge with what we've discussed today. So I've got a lot more stuff from the forgotten files.
Yes, I love that. Is that a working title or something like that?
It is a working title.
Excellent.
Yes.
Okay, and do you actually have a personal website?
Not a personal one, no, I don't. Contactable on Facebook or again via the Victorian UFO Action website. My email is there. People can contact me there if they have any additional questions or would like to know more about any of these cases that we've been discussing today.
Excellent. Well, that's great. Well, thanks so much. It's been a real pleasure, as always, as before. I really appreciate you coming on the show, and I want to also thank you. You actually took a day off of work to be on the show, and I really do appreciate that a lot. Uh-oh, was I not supposed to say that?
Yeah, I've Skyped off work for a couple of hours.
Oh, a couple of hours, you're going back to work. Yeah.
Yeah, I've got to go back to work, yeah. It's actually midday here now.
Right.
So I'm talking to you guys from the future.
That's right, we made it. We made it to Thursday. Yes.
Yeah, back to...
All right. Hey, thanks so much, Ben. You take care.
Yeah, thanks, Martin.
Bye-bye
Cheers.
Now. All right, everyone. So thanks so much for listening to the show and also for participating in the chat room. I always appreciate that a lot. Our shows will be going to be, someone just said in the chat room something about Russia, and I will be going back to Russia this year for an extended time. 42 days. So that comes up on June 15th. So starting the following week, I'm going to run these live shows on YouTube at 1 to 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I hope some of you that are listening live can make it. I realize that it really interferes with a lot of people working, but hopefully you can still come on and check out the shows. Next week, we have Linda Zimmerman, and she's going to be talking about UFOs over New York. We had her on a while back. She does have a new book called More UFOs Over New York. And she's a great guest, really likable. I'm really excited to have her on next week. So that's it. I want to thank everyone that helps out with the show. Also, Peggy, she helps with the Facebook page. Every day she puts postings up there, and she's been doing that for years now, 2 or 3 years. I want to thank her for that. There's about 23,000 likes on that page, and if you want to like us, you can check out all the latest UFO news, space news, things like that. So I think that's it for the evening. Again, thanks so much, and remember to keep your eyes to the sky.